네, 안녕하세요. 승승장구 이프로입니다. 어제 오늘 간만에 리플이 기분 좋은 상승을 보여주고 있는데요. 오늘은 이전에 리플의 CEO인 브래드 갈링하우스가 유명한 언론사인 이제 블룸버그 통신과 인터뷰를 한 영상을 가져와 봤습니다. 제가 영상을 열심히 번역을 하면서 브래드의 말을 들어보니 최근에 상승이 왜 나왔는지 이해가 딱 되더라고요. 여러분들도 이 브래드 갈링하우스가 어떤 말을 했는지 귀 기울여 들어보시면 좋으실 것 같습니다. 이제 내용이 내용이다 보니 의역과 오역이 안 되어서 영상 제작하는데 정말 많은 시간 소요되었습니다. 고생했다고 구독과 좋아요, 알림 설정 꼭 한 번씩 부탁을 드리고요. 다른 건 몰라도 좋아요는 꼭 한번 눌러주세요. 여러분들의 좋아요가 제가 영상을 제작하는데 큰 힘이 됩니다. 그리고 영상 끝자락에 영상에 대한 요약까지 해놨으니까 끝까지 시청을 부탁드리고요. 그럼 영상 시청하시겠습니다.
This has been a long battle. How much certainty does this provide? Is the entire case over?
So this provides a lot of certainty for Ripple, for frankly me personally, because the SEC had sued me. The SEC has abandoned their appeal, and so they filed suit in December of 2020. We won on the key parts of the case in the summer of 23. Judge Torres made a ruling that XRP in and of itself was not a security. That's almost a verbatim quote. The SEC filed an appeal about 8 months ago, and what they've now agreed is that they're going to drop that appeal. We still have a cross appeal pending, and so we go from being defendant really to plaintiff. So we now are in the driver's seat to determine how we want to proceed.
Are you dropping it?
We're going to see. It feels a lot better to be on the offense than the defense. You know, 4 years, we spent over $150 million defending that case. Not just for Ripple, but for the whole industry. I think it was really important that this SEC, the Gensler SEC, was really trying to bully and continue lawfare, filing lawsuits and lawsuits and lawsuits against crypto companies. That's over now, and I think that's great for the U.S. crypto industry and, frankly, great for crypto at large.
I mean, to that end, if you're looking at a new SEC, why not drop the case at this point? Why not clear the water?
Well, that certainly is an option. I mean, again, it's clear the SEC has said, you know, I think in retrospect, never would have brought this case. The judge did rule in certain instances back in 2015 and 2016, some XRP sales that we sold to accredited investors, to institutions, that those had constituted a security. And so there was a $125 million fine that's sitting in escrow. We wouldn't mind having that back. That's on the table, and I think there's some nuances to how this will play out. But it was important for us, for really the whole XRP community, for them to know that the case is over. For all intents and purposes, the case is over. The SEC is no longer pursuing this.
But to that end, to your point here, the court decision had ordered you to pay a $125 million civil penalty for exactly what you're talking about. Is that $125 million paid? Is what you're saying that's still up for dispute?
Yeah. Well, it's not in dispute. I mean, that's sitting in an escrow, and depending upon whether or not we decide to continue with our appeal, we could walk away and the whole thing would be done. On the other hand, when you have a case where there were no investor harm, no investors lost any money, you're kind of like, wait, why are we here? And it really goes back to Gary Gensler fighting a fight that was about power grab, that was about overreach of the bureaucracy to try to take a new industry. That what we're seeing now happen in Washington is smart legislation will come forward. You're seeing that happen with stable coins in real time. And I think you'll have a market structure bill, is what it's described as, to provide clarity and rules for the SEC and CFTC.
We will look at the bigger picture.
Right.
We're going to have you for a little while this morning. But do you think that part of this means fighting it till the very end to make sure even that part of uncertainty around being sold to certain investors classifies as a security? Is that what you are fighting for ultimately at this point?
Well, I mean, at this point, all we're fighting for is, do we want to fight to get the $125 million back? Look, I'll be honest, would I have walked away from that before they appealed, before President Trump put Paul Atkins and Scott Bessent and David Sachs as critical, key, very smart leaders in this industry to bring this industry back on shore? I would have walked away. Now you look at that and you're like, this case in this SEC never would have been brought. And so where we find ourselves is great. There's a clear legal victory to say XRP is not a security. That was good for the industry. But there's pieces of it that we think could be kind of cleaned up. And the question is, do we want to fight that fight, or can we come to an agreement with the SEC to drop everything?
The whole idea that this wouldn't have been brought under this SEC, have you had that specific discussion with Paul Atkins and with David Sachs?
Well, Paul Atkins hasn't yet been confirmed. He's a very knowledgeable guy about this industry and has been for a long time. But I've had conversations. I won't comment on specifics with certainly, I think David Sachs would agree that this is a case that didn't make a lot of sense in the beginning. And again, there was no investor harm. This was about Gary Gensler waging a war against this industry.
One thing a lot of people had looked at, we're thinking a lot about how the administration is handling crypto assets, particularly outside of Bitcoin. Why do you think XRP wasn't specifically named in the executive order for the digital asset stockpile?
Well, so XRP was named by the president on Truth Social. He posted something saying that there should be other tokens, that there's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve and then a crypto stockpile that would include things like
But
XRP.
days later, the executive order didn't include it. Why was that?
I don't know what specifically was in the executive order. My understanding is there's going to be a Bitcoin strategic reserve. There'll be a crypto stockpile representing other cryptos. And I would expect that will include XRP. Look, at the end of the day, I think the stark contrast is in the Biden administration, we couldn't get a meeting with people at the White House. Now we're welcomed into the White House. And that's just a massive change. And I think we want this industry to thrive in the United States. We don't want to push it offshore where you have fewer regulations.
I think the reason I keep pushing you too is because I think now it's widely accepted that this is a pro-crypto administration. But the details, that is what's causing an overhang, the uncertainty of the details. So to the extent you have confidence, right, about XRP being in that stockpile or otherwise getting more support for an ETF, for example, where does that confidence come from and what kind of timeline do you see it happening on?
So I have immense confidence on the ETF. I think there's 11 different filings pending with the SEC to launch ETFs from everybody from Bitwise to Franklin Templeton and a whole bunch of people in between. I think those will be live in the second half of this year. We have seen even outside the United States, you have live ETPs. And at a time when a lot of outflows are exiting some of the crypto ETFs, you're seeing inflows into XRP. And I think that's because you had this false negative pressure from the SEC, this kind of, an exogenous hand holding things down that's now being released. And that's great for the market. It's great for builders within the XRP ecosystem globally.
One more on the stockpile.
Yeah.
How much XRP would be in it? Where does it come from?
Well, my understanding of what I read about I think there are some questions, and that the devil may be in the details as Treasury implements some of this.
Absolutely in the details.
But my understanding is that the stockpile will be represented by seized other cryptos other than Bitcoin that then will be in that stockpile. So to the extent that various law enforcement agencies have seized cryptos, which would include XRP, that those would go into the stockpile in addition to the Bitcoin strategic reserve. That's my understanding.
네, 앞선 영상 잘 보셨을까요? 어제 오늘의 XRP 코인의 상승이 어느 정도 이해가 되셨을 겁니다. 시청 후에 어떤 생각 드셨는지 댓글로 자유롭게 의견 남겨주시고요. 영상 요약 도와드릴 수 있도록 하겠습니다. 우선 리플과 SEC의 소송의 경과인데요. 2020년 12월 처음 SEC는 리플의 경영진을 증권성 부분에서 고소를 했고 23년 여름 연방법원은 XRP 자체는 증권이 아니다라는 판결이 되었으며 이것이 바로 핵심적인 부분이었죠. 그리고 24년 SEC는 항소를 철회를 하면서 리플에게는 이는 곧 실질적인 승소가 확정이 되었으며 현재 리플은 피고에서 원고로 입장이 전환이 되었습니다. 이 소송의 결과의 의미는 XRP는 법적으로 증권이 아님이 판결이 났으며 리플은 이전 소송의 4년간 1억 5천만 달러 이상의 비용이 들어갔으며 이는 비단 리플뿐만이 아니라 전체 암호화폐를 위한 싸움이었습니다. 이제 남아있는 쟁점은 결국 이 1억 2,500만 달러에 대한 벌금인데요. 이는 아직 에스크로 계좌에 예치가 되어 있는 상태이며 리플의 현재 항소를 지속을 할지 협상을 할지 기로에 놓여져 있는 상황입니다. 이는 또한 친암호화폐적으로 구조적인 변화가 있었음에 가능했는데요. 폴 애트킨스 SEC의 신임 의장, 데이비드 sak스 백악관 암호화폐 책임자 등 친암호화폐 인사들이 대거 기용되면서 이전에는 백악관과의 접촉조차 어려웠지만 현재는 백악관에서 초청까지 받으면서 업계와의 협력 분위기가 형성이 되었습니다. XRP의 현물 ETF의 출시에 대한 전망입니다. 현재 11개 이상의 기관들이 XRP의 현물 ETF를 신청을 한 상태이며 여기에는 비트와이즈, 프랭클린 템플턴 등 대형 기관이 다수이고요. 25년 올해 하반기에 출시가 될 것으로 브래드 갈링하우스는 전망을 했으며 이제 SEC의 규제가 사라지면서 시장의 긍정적 반응 그리고 기대감이 올라가고 있는 상황입니다. 그리고 이제 전략 자산에 대해서는 현재 정부에서는 비트코인만을 비축하고 있지만 XRP 외에 기타 암호화폐 또한 포함이 될 것으로 예상이 되며 해당 내용의 세부 사항 같은 경우에는 미국 재무부의 집행 방식에 따라 결정이 될 예정입니다. 자, 마지막으로 결론 및 시사점입니다. 리플에 대한 법적 불확실성은 사실상 종료가 된 상황이고요. 이로 인해 리플은 보다 공격적인 전략을 내세울 것이며 이는 암호화폐 내 산업에 대한 정책이 친암호화폐적으로 바뀐 데에 그 의미가 있으며 앞으로의 ETF, 전략자산으로의 편입 등 XRP 토큰의 제도권 편입이 가속화가 기대됩니다. 자, 오늘 영상은 제가 여기서 마무리할 것이고요. 영상 유익하셨다면 구독과 좋아요, 알람 설정 한 번씩 부탁드리면서 저는 또 다른 영상으로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 영상 시청하느라 고생하셨습니다. 감사합니다.